I attended a Mormon university and I regret it. And BYU is owned and operated by the Mormon Church, and 99% of the student population identifies as Mormon. BYU stands for Brigham Young University, and Brigham Young was the second prophet of the church. When I was growing up and when I attended, people would non-ironically call BYU the Lord's University. And there's also BYU Hawaii and BYU Idaho. I got my bachelor's degree from BYU Provo. I graduated in 2017, and here are some of my graduation pictures, and you can see I'm really pretty gleeful in these photos, and that's because I had been questioning the church for about a year at this point. And if you get outed as questioning the church, or having a cup of coffee, or doing anything that's against the honor code at the school, you're risking getting kicked out and losing all the progress you've made toward your degree. And so the reason I'm so happy on this day is specifically because I finally felt like I could be free. I could finally start to be honest about what I had been going through, and I no longer had this threat of potentially losing my progress toward my degree hanging over my head. It was actually as I researched for this video that I realized that I tried coffee just a few days after these photos were taken, because I didn't quite remember the exact timeline. It was kind of a long time ago, and I truly held off on trying coffee for the first time until I had fully graduated from BYU. And I think that reveals just how much I wanted to make sure that I was not going to get kicked out of the university, and that I was fully waiting to get my diploma in hand before I made the jump into trying the sinful act of drinking coffee. And reflecting back on my time at BYU, I do regret choosing to go there, especially when I hear stories of college experiences from other people who didn't go to a super ultra strict religious university. And that's not to say that I don't take accountability for choosing to go there. I feel like sometimes when I say I regret my Mormon wedding or regret serving a mission, people are accusing me of saying I don't take any accountability for making that choice. I do think there's a conversation to be had there about being indoctrinated to go on a very specific life path, which I'm going to get into in this video. But I think first of all, I'm just allowed to feel regret about a choice I made in my own life. And I don't think feeling regret about a choice you made is the same as trying to shirk accountability for it. It's merely to say that if I were to do these things over again, I would make different choices based off of the knowledge and information and what I know now. If you clicked on this video, I feel like there's a non-trivial chance that you've seen BYU before on the internet. In the last year or two, BYU has gone viral multiple times over BYU interviews, and I've had a lot of people ask me to watch them and react to them, which I am going to do in this video. Here's one video that went very viral.
Would you rather have a sip of alcohol or kill a puppy?
Kill a puppy. I mean, you can cook that alcohol. I'll do that.
The Book of Mormon or Black History Month?
This might get me canceled, but the Book of Mormon, it teaches the same things that Black History Month. The same things that Black History Month is like trying to get people to recognize. The Book of Mormon teaches it.
What's your favorite party drink?
I never go to parties and I've never tasted it.
Unsurprisingly, that video has 652,000 likes. This is from the account on TikTok called Robert Carpenter. He's done some of the most viral BYU interviews. I also will be sharing my analysis in this video that I personally have a conspiracy theory that he's not always interviewing actual Mormons at BYU, but he's bringing some people on campus with him and kind of making a little skit, which is being passed off as real BYU students. So I'll talk about that in this video. That's just my analysis as a bystander watching these videos. Another account that's very well known for interviews at BYU is known as the Black Menaces. Here's one of their videos.
How many Black friends do you have at BYU?
Honestly, none.
That's okay.
But honestly, I'm kind of awkward and I don't have a lot of friends anyway,
No
so.
worries. Thank you.
I have 2 friends that are Black at BYU.
I have one.
I don't have any Black friends at BYU.
Same to you.
Unfortunately, I don't either.
That video has 1.8 million likes, and the Black Menaces also go to other universities. A lot of them are conservative universities or other religious universities and do similar types of interviews. And in case you're wondering, less than 1% of BYU student population is Black, so BYU is very Mormon and very white. And I definitely prefer their content, the Black Menaces interview content, to Robert Carpenter's. As I said, I think that he's kind of messing with the internet a little bit, which I'll get into, but I highly suggest following their account if you want to see more of those style of interviews. A common question I see popping up in videos like this, because like I said, these videos are like viral hit after viral hit. I swear any interview at BYU seems to go viral. And a lot of people I see asking if BYU is even accredited as a university, which it fully is. It's fully accredited. They're actually right now applying to get a medical school there, which as someone who received medical care as a woman from the health center, I have strong feelings about them entering further into the healthcare field. It's also just so strange to watch those videos as someone who spent a lot of time at BYU. I attended that college, and so seeing the library scenes or seeing the courtyard, really anywhere they're doing these interviews, are places I spent years attending that college. And so it's just a little surreal to see, almost feeling like I'm seeing a bit of myself in my past in these interviews. And it definitely is strange to kind of revisit that part of my life through these interviews. But I think the main reason I regret my time at BYU is that I feel like I really missed out on a lot of exploration and growth. Because when I talk to friends about college, in a lot of ways their viewpoints were challenged. They had to learn a lot about themselves. They had a lot of opportunity to go from being a 17, 18-year-old in college under their parents' wing to becoming an adult and being faced with really challenging experiences that helped them become who they wanted to be. However, for me, I feel like rather than having my viewpoints challenged, I feel like my viewpoints were hardened. Or rather, that's what the purpose of the university was. It was meant to promote faith. It was meant to help me grow my testimony. It was meant to help me become more devout. And it was not meant to have me question the premise of most of my life. I attended a lot of church camps growing up, whether it was EFY or they'd have a weekend activity or I went to girls' camp. There was a lot of youth activities growing up, and it was always all Mormon kids. And I distinctly remember when I went to BYU feeling like I was still at EFY, especially for youth. So here's a picture of me at EFY. It's basically like a religious church camp that goes across the course of a week. And I would stay the night. It was like a sleepaway camp. And I remember when I was at BYU feeling like I was just simply still at EFY, which at the time felt like kind of fun because it was like, oh, it's like more of my summer camps that I've already experienced. But hearing other people's college experiences, like I said, I don't think they felt like their college experience was just an extension of a teenage summer camp. I think there are so many ways I just still felt like I was being treated like a child, whether it was the curfew or the lessons I was learning or the religious focus of so many conversations. It just felt like a very infantilizing experience to go from being hyper-religious in my family's house to being hyper-religious at the university with not a lot of bridge to suddenly feel like I'm being treated differently in any way. I remember my first week there, we had student orientation and I went to church the first week, and our first lesson in church was about chastity. And it was basically felt like they were laying down the law for us kids. Don't get any ideas. And we read all of these quotes from leaders about keeping moral purity. And we had the women come talk to us about the boys might expect or think something's going to happen, but you need to be the guardians of purity and virtue. And even that, I felt like was just still me being in my youth group. So Mormon girls go to something like Young Women's, and I received so many lessons about chastity in Young Women's. And so to go to college and to feel like, all right, I'm 18, I'm here, I'm living on my own now, I'm not with my parents, and then we're just still having the same conversation about chastity, especially when I was so devout that I was not planning on having sex at all. It was the furthest thing from my mind. It just felt like, are we still so not trusted that we just have to continue to have this conversation over and over and over again? Like, why would I even come to BYU if I didn't want to follow these rules? I recognize there are people who go to BYU who don't follow the rules, and maybe sometimes I'm like, probably should have been a little bit more like that. But I did feel like the way they're continuing to condescend to us, to teach us chastity over and over and over again, it just felt very much like I was still just a little teenage girl. I also looked back at my old BYU transcript as I was making my outline for this video, and it's crazy to me how much time I spent in religion classes, and that I studied the Book of Mormon for 2 semesters. And these are not religion classes that you elect to take. You have to take the religion classes in order to graduate. And 2 of those religion classes of the 5 I took were Book of Mormon classes, which was also required. You can't just take all Bible classes. You have to take 2 classes in the Book of Mormon. And I also found my old assignments I did as part of that. And I'm writing like long essays about the Book of Mormon, which to me is just so faux intellectual that I'm writing a essay about a fan fiction of the Bible. And that's how I'm spending my university experience. It's just kind of laughable. Another one of my religion classes I took was from a man named Elder Bott, or Professor Bott, and at the time he was super popular. According to Wikipedia, in 2008, he was the highest rated professor in the United States on Rate My Professor, and that was in 2008. But in 2012, he landed in the Washington Post for his discriminatory and racist remarks on Black members of the church not receiving the priesthood until the late 1970s. According to the article, Randy Bott said that God not allowing Black people to have the priesthood was actually a blessing to them. And the quote is, "You couldn't fall off the top of the ladder because you weren't on top of the ladder." So in reality, the Blacks not having the priesthood was the greatest blessing God could give them. So that person who said that, as you can see from my transcript, I literally took a class from this person, from someone that is so overtly racist. He also says, compares Blacks with a young child prematurely asking for the keys to her father's car, and explains that similarly until 1978, the Lord determined that Blacks were not ready for the priesthood. So that old benevolent racism that says that being racist was actually for the best for Black people, which is so absolutely nonsensical and false. And so when I say I regret attending BYU, these are the reasons why, is that if I could go anywhere for this transformative time of my life to study at a university, which is really a great opportunity to really learn about yourself and learn about the world. Instead of doing the learning, I was getting indoctrinated. And I also thought it was funny that in my Book of Mormon class, I got a B+, which is probably why I ended up leaving the church. Any good Mormon would have gotten an A. But I've always really struggled with memorization, and a lot of these courses rely heavily on memorization. To me, when I'm looking at my assignments, it's just, I feel like my experience at BYU was so faux intellectual because you're discussing a religion. I mean, the entire university is based on a religion that's pretty demonstrably false, especially using university-style research techniques and logic. And so to see me carefully formatting my Book of Mormon essay using MLA standards and carefully choosing great quotations to back up my argument about Book of Mormon characters using scriptures from the Book of Mormon, it's such strange circular logic that it's just a little funny and laughable to look at, and to see me trying so hard to use intellect to argue or to write an essay about something that is just simply not intellectual and illogical. Another reason I feel like I regret my BYU degree is that degrees from BYU are not very respected in a lot of circles. So they're highly respected amongst other Mormons, especially BYU Provo is the most rigorous and difficult to get into. So If you have a degree from BYU Provo, it elevates your, I think, your position within the church because it's the hardest one of the colleges to get into. But once you step outside the Mormon bubble, the level to which people are oohing and ahhing about your Mormon degree it goes down significantly. And so I feel like I was a pretty good student in high school. And if I was going to spend 4 years of my life pursuing a degree, I wish I would have potentially pursued a degree from a university that has more universal respect rather than simply just respect within my small circle of Mormondom. And I really haven't even talked yet about the honor code, which is an incredibly strict and major part of the university. I've talked about it a lot in short form videos, but that really goes also a long way into feeling like you're still being treated like a child. One example of how we were really treated like children is something called the threshold rule. So you were not allowed to have boys or men at that point, but I use boys because it felt like we were all still children, into your room. There's no visiting from the opposite sex in the rooms. So say, for example, you wanted to sit on your bed and talk. That could get you kicked out of the university sit on your bed and talk with someone of the opposite sex. And this even extended past bedrooms to bathrooms as well. And it even expressly says in the honor code that you're only allowed to use the opposite gender's restroom within their dorm if it's like a dire situation, like they're about to throw up or incredibly sick or something. And I remember there were a few occasions in which someone would be over and would be a boy, a man would be over, a guy would be over and would ask to use the bathroom, and we'd have to be like, no, and he'd be like, but it's an emergency. I really kind of need to use your restroom. I don't want to walk down 3 flights of stairs, walk all the way, because even the boys and girls are in different rooms. I keep calling it boys and girls. Even the men and women are in different buildings. So there were situations where a guy would be over, he would want to use the restroom, and would say, I kind of really need to go, and we would still deny him the opportunity. So we'd say, you need to go down the stairs, go all the way to your boys' dorm, and then you can take care of business over there. And something that we'll get into in this video is that you can actually fully rat out your roommates or anyone attending the university. There's a whole form for it, and you can even do it anonymously. And so I've heard stories of people getting in trouble with the honor code office because their roommates saw a man go into a female's room to pick up a box as she was moving out and help her move out, and trying to get them in trouble for that because he crossed the threshold. And this is similar to the extremity of when I've talked about sight and sound on a Mormon mission, where you're supposed to, even within the same house, you're supposed to stay within sight and sound of the other person unless you're using the restroom. And I feel like there were cases in which someone would cross the threshold and get in trouble for that merely for sticking your head in the door is crossing the threshold. And so people would take these rules really seriously. And it to me, in many ways, was an extension of the religion to follow these rules. So it's not just that crossing the threshold is against the university, it's against the Lord's university. And so breaking these rules for many people, in my experience, wasn't seen as, oh, that's against university policy. It was basically, these are the laws of God, and to cross the threshold is to sin, and you've displeased the Lord himself, and you deserve to have some severe consequences. Another way we were babied was our curfew. When I was in student housing, we had a specific curfew, and at that time, the young men had to be kicked out, and there were no guys allowed past midnight, essentially. And on Friday nights, they allow it to be till 1 a.m. Similarly so, I have visceral memories of people having the clock available and down to the second being like, the clock turned to midnight, you better leave, like you've turned into a pumpkin. And the RAs, we'd have RAs that would walk around and they'd walk up the stairs, down the stairs, and check to make sure that everyone had cleared out and just that they were following the rules. And most universities don't have curfews in this way. Growing up, when I was a teenager, my family's curfew was like 9 p.m. So midnight felt like a wild time, but it still was not nearly as free as most other universities one might attend. We would also have a lot of classes start with a prayer, which at the time felt so normal. And that's why it was so strange, I think, looking back, is at the time, coming from a devout Mormon household to going to a devout Mormon university, none of it feels that odd. Even if something does feel odd, you're like, well, I trust my church to be doing the right thing, and I'm the outlier here. But when I think about things like praying before starting a history class or a biology class, I'm sure that's something that most students would be like, what are we doing here exactly? This is actually I took Spanish classes. I'm not good at it, but I comprehend more than I can speak. But I found this, which is my prayer that I was supposed to memorize in Spanish, so that basically when the professor would call on us to say the opening prayer for the class or closing prayer, I would be able to be prepared to pray in Spanish. So I just thought that was a funny little memento of my time at BYU, is that even within my Spanish class, I am learning to speak Spanish specifically in a religious capacity. The policing around modesty was also really frustrating. There's a place called the testing center. If you're breaking the modesty honor code rules, you can't take your test. So another famous BYU rule is no beards. And I knew guys who would literally bring a little shaving kit onto campus because if they had any 5 o'clock shadow, any little stubble or anything like that, they could be turned away from their exam. It was always very dystopian to go to the testing center because you go, you have your backpack, you wait in a line, and you give them your BYU ID, and then they do an up-down check. They look at your skirt length. They look at your beard. If you have any stubble, they see if you have unnatural hair colors, any piercings. I mean, it would be very atypical for a BYU student to be breaking the honor code, like by having a tattoo, for example. But the beard one was a common one, or too short of skirt, or maybe your shirt is not covering your shoulders. But they truly give you the up down to make sure you're living the honor code, make sure you're following all of the dress and grooming standards. And I've legitimately heard stories of friends I knew who were turned away from taking exams because they weren't following the dressing and grooming standards. And so basically people would often, whether it was bringing a shaving kit or just being extra careful, like on the day that you're taking a test, being extra careful to be following all of those dress and grooming standards so that you could still take your test, because if you potentially were waiting till the last day the test was available, you were really getting into dangerous territory, because if you got turned away from taking your test, you might just fail a class because your beard was growing in a little bit. And honestly, when I think back on my time at BYU, it's hard to comprehend or accept the reality that I was literally an adult when I was allowing all of these rules to be shoved down my throat. Like, I was 20, 21, 22, and I'm allowing someone to be like, it's past curfew, time to go. And I'm, carefully making sure that I'm perfectly modest to take my test because Big Brother is gonna give me the up down to make sure I'm living according to the standards, and that all of these things are things I'm simply okay with, especially at the time when I was starting to question. It really started to feel very crushing to even go onto campus, to even feel like maybe they're gonna figure out how to read my thoughts and know that I don't belong here anymore. What's shocking too is that some people now are saying that BYU is too liberal, and a common theme amongst older people in the church is that you shouldn't send your kids to BYU. You should send them either to BYU Idaho or to keep them at a state school, because they'll be more my opinion is they want them to be more isolated, so they just continue to practice how devout they were, because BYU is almost like a liberal gateway to leaving the church, which is a common thing that people especially in the last 5 years, I feel like I'm seeing and hearing more people say stuff like that. I mentioned the Lord's University earlier. Some people will say that BYU Provo is the church's university and that BYU Idaho is the Lord's University, because BYU Idaho is more strict. It's also even more religious, and essentially just that because BYU has some more liberal professors, that they get into the minds of impressionable young BYU students and convince them to have things like empathy towards gay people. And so I feel like it is kind of funny to see how BYU is leaning a little bit more toward being on the liberal side of Mormons, and how the older guard of the church is recognizing it and expressing dissatisfaction. I remember my first Sunday, which was the same Sunday that I got all the chastity lesson. I had a roommate who was listening to pop music on Sunday. And in my family, we weren't allowed to watch TV on Sunday unless it was media produced by the church. And we definitely weren't allowed to listen to worldly music of any kind. And she was listening to pop music with swear words, which I wouldn't have listened to any day of the week. And I just remember feeling like these Mormons are not devout enough. And it was funny to read the book Educated, because she also attended BYU and expressed a similar sentiment that she was meeting more liberal Mormons, because Utah often has members who are mostly cultural Mormon but not very devout. And so I met a lot of those types of Mormons who didn't have a devout way of following the religion as much as just were culturally expected to go to BYU and serve a mission, but they would do things like listen to pop music on Sundays. And it was very strange to me, coming from my devout Mormon home, to discover that not all Mormons were as devout as I was, which is also just so laughable, considering that if probably any more mainstream secular person had met that roommate that was playing that music, they would still consider her to be quite religious. And so I think it just shows how far down the rabbit hole of Mormonism I really was, and especially raised to be. And you know, I mean, I did leave the church while at BYU, so maybe there's something to the claims that BYU is too liberal. Before we continue, just a quick reminder to like this video, subscribe to my channel. I have a new video about the Mormon Church or doctrine or pop culture every single week, so don't forget to subscribe if you want to see that. I also have a Patreon with additional bonus content that is just for Patreon. I don't post it over here on YouTube. Here are some of the examples of things I've posted on Patreon recently, so consider checking that out if you want to see more. Now, I've been showing some of my different essays and classwork that I did while at BYU, the religious classwork, and I found this essay, which felt so wild to me that I felt like I had to read it, because I'm like, who is this girl, honestly, writing this essay? I would have written this my freshman year, so I was 18. And I'm writing an essay for my Book of Mormon class. And I was supposed to go watch a documentary about the Book of Mormon, which feels like an oxymoron. I don't think Book of Mormon and documentary necessarily should be in the same sentence, but I was watching a documentary, which this is the documentary, about the Book of Mormon and about the histories of the peoples found in the Book of Mormon. And so here is a sentence or a paragraph that I wrote about the journey of some Book of Mormon people across a desert. I said, though many times in scripture reading, women are put to the side to make room for the stories of men. In the Book of Mormon, women have a very big role. What could that be? I'm sure they were really calling the shots. The women made food for the entire party, which could have taken more than 3 hours per day. This is a fictional book. I'm making this shit up. Though maybe in the documentary it said it probably took 3 hours a day. The women also wove fabric that was used to make the tents which the camp stayed in. They had to spend long hours weaving huge pieces of fabric. The amount of effort that must have been put into this huge project is awesome. they must have had such strength and skill. So in this essay, I am literally attempting to do a feminist reading of the Book of Mormon. For reference, when I say that women have a, quote, very big role in the Book of Mormon, there are over 300 men named in the Book of Mormon. And just take a guess for a second, how many women? There's 6 women who are given names in the Book of Mormon. And in another part of my essay, I said, the movie put it well. The men had power, but the women held influence over their husbands. Even though she was only a woman, Sariah still had a say in what happened. So just to see the way I'm describing and attempting to find goodness, I'm describing the women as strong and courageous, for making food and for sewing pieces of cloth together. And while the men get to revelate and see visions and decide the fate of the entire party, the women spend 3 hours a day making the food. So that shows that they're important. Even just the idea that at one point in my life, I would begin a sentence by saying, though she was only a woman, I really think underscores this is what I was writing at BYU. This is what I was taught to believe about women. And that's why I was like, it was very eye-opening to find this essay, because I was like, oh, I really had some internalized misogyny. I really viewed women as less than men back when I was Mormon. Like at this 18-year-old me version, I'm writing it into print. I will link this entire essay down below if you want to go read it in its entirety. It's quite saddening to see the insides of my brain back then. And part of me is like, maybe that's why I got a B+ in the Book of Mormon. It's because the professor, who was male, was like, this girl is always trying to bring up women's issues, and we're not trying to be feminists over here. We are just for the men. And so I'm like, maybe I got a bad grade because I just wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid hard enough. I also found another essay, which was, it's unclear how exactly, I put it in my folder about the Book of Mormon class. So I assume I wrote this at some point for my Book of Mormon class, some assignment at some point. But I thought I'd read another portion because, oh my God, it's so bad. If you've seen my short form videos, you know that occasionally I'll make ones that are like cringiest things I said when I was Mormon. And some people accuse me of hyperbole in those cringy things I said when I was Mormon. But I'm about to read you another essay I wrote when I was Mormon, 18, and I think it'll add some evidence to the fact that I was quite judgmental and quite up on my high horse when I was Mormon. So I'm just going to read the paragraph. When I was younger, I fell into a particularly bad group of friends. They enjoyed swearing and smoking and the occasional loose act. I did not join in, but who your friends are eventually becomes who you are. I may have felt like a shining beacon of light amongst their black hole-like beings, but in hindsight, their personalities affected me in a very real way. I was sinning. It was not till I got skipping school and lying to a teacher that I realized how far away from the straight and narrow path I had traveled. The summer after that school year, I made a major transition. It probably seemed like I disappeared off the face of the planet to my former friends. They even cared. I was busy climbing back from the deep hole I had slowly built for myself. So I've talked about this time in my life in other videos, which is when in middle school I went through a rebellious phase, which was literally just me being friends with kids who use swear words. And I mean, yeah, basically what I put there. So this is middle school. So I am literally in my 18-year-old brain looking back upon middle school students and describing them as having black hole-like beings. And that for me to skip school and lie to a teacher was something that I had to climb back from the deep hole I had slowly built for myself. So you can hear in this, first of all, I'm describing things that are quite typical for middle and high schoolers to go through. And yet, you would think I would be describing fraternizing with murderers or committing some federal offense to say how far away from the straight and narrow path I had traveled. And I think it just shows, first of all, my guilt complex when I was Mormon, that I would truly have very deep guilt about the most inane and trivial things that were quite human, you know, just normal human things to go through. Skipping school once, pretty normal kid thing. And yet I'm describing it in terms that I'm clearly feeling like I'm on the path to hell, and that I have to crawl my way back up to repent from this dark time in my life when I was really just a middle schooler going through common and typical middle school things. I also think it's interesting that I wrote in this essay, they even cared, because I think I meant that. So I probably seem like I've disappeared from off the face of the earth. They even cared. I don't know if I meant to say there, they didn't even care. I remember that they did care. So I think I'm writing in there that my friends were like, Alyssa, we miss you. What's been going on? Like, I really had an emotional shutdown at that time when I got caught skipping school in middle school. That one day, I very much emotionally shut down. And I remember the friends that I had prior to the event trying to talk to me and, how you doing, Alyssa? Do you want to come sit with us at lunch? And still continuing to be friendly. And I truly viewed them as black hole-like beings. And I started ignoring them. I iced them out. I tried to make friends with other Mormon kids, even though those kids were way meaner to me than the kids I'm describing in this essay. And it just made me so sad to read this, that I was interpreting anyone in middle school as having a black hole and as a soul. Like, what a way to describe not just another human, but what a way to describe a child. And I think really between the Book of Mormon essay and then this personal experience essay, I think it really just reveals like the level to which I was indoctrinated to view common life events as dire, as sinful or repentant, the way I was indoctrinated to view women as less than men. It's really sad to read through these and to even think I submitted these to professors who were like, sounds about right. It's similar to the video I made in the past reacting to my interview, which is also really interesting if you wanted to go watch it, and comparing myself to the girl that's talking in that interview, which is from around the same time. This was when I was back from my mission, so this was when I was in like 22, 23. But I still feel like the same energy applies, where the way in which I'm acting is so foreign to me, and it's me. And so I just thought it was interesting to stumble upon these as I was looking through my old BYU resources and classwork and essays, and feel like I'm really getting a blast from the scary past reading through these. With all of that being said, I did make a separate Patreon video where I read through more of these. These are not the only 2 essays I found. I read through and react to more sections and more of my classwork, and I was like, wow, what a strange world to look back into. But if you want to see the longer reaction to some of these old artifacts of my Mormon self, it's on Patreon if you want to check it out after this video. I also have to underscore the level to which attending BYU is the option for Mormon kids. This is the gold standard. If you've watched my videos, you know that basically every well-known Mormon figure that I share, from Stephanie Meyer to Mitt Romney, most of them have the same path. This path is usually to grow up in a big Mormon family, to attend BYU, to serve a Mormon mission, to get married within 6 months to a year after returning from that mission, and then to go on to have a big family of your own. When I was growing up, there was a few times where we were near Provo and we would go walk around campus, and my parents would say, someday you guys can go to college here. My parents also met at BYU and got married while attending BYU, and so I just heard a ton of stories about BYU growing up. It was really the only college in my mind that even really existed. It wasn't until I was probably a junior in high school that I started thinking like, oh, I guess I could go to other colleges. And when I applied to go to college, I only applied to Brigham Young University and to UK, University of Kentucky, which is where we lived at the time. And I was basically like, if I don't get into BYU, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I kind of just applied to a secondary college as a backup option, but I really had only one university in my mind as the place I wanted to attend. And I think to some extent that's also why you don't care as much about the rules, because first of all Mormon kids are very used to lots of rules and lots of expectations and having a lot of their freedoms curtailed, but also because it's held up as such a culturally important thing to do and such a thing to be proud of. A BYU degree is something that people really respect you for, that it's almost like the rules feel secondary to the cultural cachet you get as a result of attending BYU. And a lot of parents, I knew kids at BYU who their parents would refuse to pay for their college unless they attended a church school. So there were kids who might have wanted to go to other places, but the only place they could afford to go with help from their parents was to go to BYU. This is also common for people serving missions. So I won't get you a car unless you serve a mission, or I won't pay your BYU tuition, or I won't pay your college tuition unless you serve a mission. So some of these big developmental milestones of going to college, serving a mission, these things are used by Mormon parents often as a way to say, if you want this one thing, you have to do this thing that's required by our religion or culturally required first. I also, back when I was in high school, had received a letter because I really liked running. And I remember I got a letter personally to me based off of my running stats that was offering me, basically like kind of pre-offering me a running scholarship to attend this one university. I remember getting the letter and feeling really excited and feeling like, wow, random people have recognized that I'm accomplishing a lot with my running and I'm good at it and I'm fast. And I feel so sad that I never even called the phone number or, emailed the email on the letter. I never passed just being like, wow, this is a fun letter to receive, because I was so dialed in that I'm Mormon and I'm going to go to BYU. I never even allowed myself to consider what in hindsight was a pretty cool opportunity, and could have been an opportunity for me to continue running, be on a cross-country team in college, get some financial help, just try something that was different than the trotting upon the same path my parents had trod. And I feel regret that because I was so single-minded about my religion, I really systematically, when I look back on my upbringing and childhood and teenage years, pretty systematically not accepting any opportunity that wasn't in line with my religion. And I just think that closed a lot of doors for me that didn't need to be closed. I think that had I been encouraged simply to pursue many paths rather than one single path, I could have made choices that were more informed by who I was rather than who my religion wanted me to be. Outside of the cultural expectation to go to BYU, there's also the financial side, which for anyone who's ever attended or considered attending college, the financial aspect is a huge portion of the decision-making process. And as you can see here, the way tuition works at BYU is that it's either if you're a member or not a member. And so for members of the church, you get about half the cost of a non-member at BYU. And even for a non-member at BYU, it's still cheaper than a lot of state colleges. And I personally knew people who, as they were non-members attending BYU, chose to get baptized. Some of them later told me it was simply to get cheaper tuition, which is highly logical. I wouldn't judge them per se, though I might be like, oh, just don't go to BYU to begin with. But it's so funny because I remember people used to say, oh, isn't it cool that a lot of non-members who attend BYU get baptized? Because that was also a common trope, was like, people think that, oh, because these non-members come to BYU and then they're surrounded by the gospel and surrounded by the saints and surrounded by the goodness and the happiness that comes from the gospel, then they get baptized. Isn't that so cool? And just proof that the church is true, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like even at the time I was a little bit like, well, they're also getting half off of their tuition. So I don't know if their motives are as pure as you're making them out to be. I mean, I'm not complaining about a cheap degree, but there were many times in which they would basically lord it over our heads to say that we needed to feel responsible to follow the honor code and to get good grades, because what they would say is that students' tuition at BYU is subsidized by tithing money. And basically that the tithe payers of the church are what's making it possible for us to have cheaper tuition. And so to not act in an honorable way as a BYU student was really just a slap in the face to the tithe payers, because they had consecrated their money to the church and by proxy to our education. And so for us to do something like drink coffee or have a boy cross the threshold was beyond the pale. And I do feel like even though you do pay less at BYU in tuition, you definitely pay more in other ways, like with your personal freedoms and mental health. This brings us to my story about the restricted section at BYU. I figured I'd just layer some of my own personal stories into my explanation of the university. At BYU, as I've been saying, there's a lot of very devout people, students, and for a while I worked at the BYU library, which is called the Harold B. Lee Library, named after a prophet. And I remember I worked in a interlibrary loans, so I would have to, someone would request a book, I would go with my little library cart and go find the book, and then we would package it up and send it to them, whether it was within the university or at another university. So this would mean that I would have to go to all the different floors of the libraries, maybe to special collections, and there was this one specific room that we would call the restricted section. Basically, I asked my boss, so I know the music books are with the music books, and I know the history books are with the history books. So what books end up in the restricted section? What's that one about? And he said that the restricted section was mostly disfavorable church history, and it was anatomy books. And the problem was that they were occasionally having a problem with the students defacing books. So the two reasons he said that these books were here to begin with was, first, because if there was an anatomy book that showed immodesty, because keep in mind, we're all naked under our clothes, that a student would take it upon themselves to rip the page out or to get a Sharpie and color over it, and that the students would censor books with questionable materials, some of which being science, and that the school felt the need to hide away some of these books, not because the school even in his accounting was trying to censor the materials, but because the students were censoring the books themselves. And for church history, he said basically similar thing. People would deface church history books, and some of them were quite old, and so they would just be keeping these books separate from the student populace in order to protect the books from being defaced. And telling that was actually one of my very first ever viral videos on TikTok. And I remember a member made a video saying I was lying, which I would soon learn was very common for people to say about anything that comes out of my mouth, that she's lying. One of my favorite internet isms, not to get on too much of a tangent, is that people will say I'm lying, and then someone else will come in the comments and be like, well, what is she lying about? And then they don't respond, because I'm not lying. But I did find this article about the restricted section of the library at Harold B. Lee Library. They don't chalk it up to the same exact thing my boss did, probably because putting that in print would be quite odd, but they do speak to the fact that it does exist. I also wrote down to tell my story of my biology class, because it is related, biology, anatomy. But another common question I get about BYU is, how do they teach science at all there? Because science is obviously at odds often with religion, and especially with the Mormon religion. And I can't speak to all science classes because I had an English degree, but I did have to take some 101 science classes. And in my biology class, I remember that my professor was prefacing the fact that we'd be talking about evolution. And depending on what your family is and the level to which you are devout, I think some people end up hearing more conversations that discredit evolution than others. But I did think it was so interesting because he was basically within this speech teaching us how to have cognitive dissonance about science. So he essentially said, a lot of students feel like they don't want to learn about evolution because evolution is contradictory to the story of Adam and Eve. And so he basically said that when we're learning about evolution, we need to just put that on one side of our brain and know that the story of evolution is simply only the accepted science that we have now, and that humans have been wrong about science in the past. And so we know that Adam and Eve really existed. We know that they're real people and that the Garden of Eden is in Missouri. And we all know that in this room. But when we go out into the world and are scientists within the scientific community, we must use the language that they've accepted as current science, even though we know that Adam and Eve was a real thing. And surely one of these days, some discovery will be made to reaffirm that science and Adam and Eve existed in harmony. It's just that humans are wrong right now, and because we are existing in this phase of the earth, we have to essentially accept the science as it is, even though we know it's not actually right. And he really truly gave that whole speech, and I feel like looking back, it's crazy to realize like how much he was teaching us to have separate parts of our brain and to not allow the different parts of our brain to touch or to interact with each other. Like there's the Mormon truth side of your brain, and then there's the accepted scientific logic side of your brain. And these two things can exist, and they can even disagree, and we can accept the fact that they disagree because we know in the end that the church is true, and that is the most fundamental, important fact of reality. I figured now I'd react to more portions of the interviews. We're gonna first start with Robert Carpenter. That's just his account name. Here's another example of one of his interviews.
Would you rather go to war or have a sip of coffee?
Definitely war.
Name 3 alcoholic beverages.
Tequila.
Would you rather have a sip of alcohol or unalive a puppy?
I mean, I've eaten dog before.
What are your thoughts on soaking?
It's just easiest way to do it without doing it.
If you're not sober, you will go to hell.
Have you ever watched Rated R?
So I've kind of already said this, but my theory about his account, unfounded, but just hear me out, is that he mixes non-members in with members. A lot of his videos where the people will be like, or I'll go to hell. So Mormons don't call hell hell. That's a pretty easy one to well, also they consider hell a swear word. Like anytime I've ever heard a Mormon say hell, it's heck. And he also has people talk pretty openly about sex. Some of his people he interviews are like, why are you asking me that? Which to me is much more of a common Mormon reaction in my mind. I realize I've been out of the church for a bit, but I go to Utah a lot. A lot of my family's still members. And I also consume a lot of Mormon content out of curiosity. And to me, their reaction is pretty patently not what I've seen amongst Mormons. Like, to me, if you ask a Mormon about sex, they'll be like, whoa, like kind of have a little mini freak out, versus being like, yeah, soaking's the way to get it done. I'm not buying it, but I can't find anything online to show that he's not interviewing members. So that's just my hot take. Here's another example. He's asking her about soaking, and this is her response.
Easiest thing that's happened to you at BYUI?
Someone asked me to shake the bed for soaking once.
And what'd you say?
Gotta help your friends out sometimes.
What are your thoughts on soaking?
I mean, I think it's kind of cool. It's like kind of gross too.
What's your craziest experience with mutual?
So I went on a mutual date one time. A month later, he was engaged. He was more wanting to just derf, but I was down for derfing.
What's the biggest age gap you've seen between?
I just, like, the rules are so strict at BYU that I have a hard time that a girl's like, I just want to derf, is like attending BYU with those very, very short shorts. Let's keep watching.
A couple.
11 years or something.
How many children do they have?
5.
Only 5?
Yeah.
What's the craziest thing that's happened to you at BYUI?
I heard about someone shaking the bed for their 2 friends soaking.
What are your thoughts on spotlighting?
Like, it's such a canned response, and every single person he talks to talks about soaking. And I feel like he's telling them what to say. This girl also from the video, she has her tummy showing and she's wearing a tank top. And I'm like, that would be against the dress code at BYU, Idaho. So like I said, maybe these are real, but often enough when I'm watching them, the callousness with which they talk about drinking, they talk about soaking, they talk about derfing. This is not how I've heard any Mormon speak ever.
The craziest thing that's happened to you at BYU?
I shook a bed for soaking.
I'm sorry. If you admitted to this, you could get kicked out of the university. She also has like a little side showing here, and she's like, ha 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 ha. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just not buying it. If this is you, if you are this girl and you're Mormon, please feel free to contact me and be like, here's my Mormon bona fides. But for someone who has as much sexual repression as I experienced and is attending this university, to be like, I shook the bed for soaking, ha ha ha, like raucous laughter, I'm like, I just don't see it. However, and this is why I think he's potentially sneaky, the girl after this, to me, does seem Mormon.
The Book of Mormon or Black History Month?
I have a very strong testimony of the Book of Mormon, so gotta say that.
In my analysis, this woman, very soft-spoken, very meek. I have a very strong testimony of the Book of Mormon. Using the word testimony even. Mormons don't really use words like soaking constantly as you would expect from his videos. They do, though, talk about the Book of Mormon a lot, and they talk about their testimonies, and she's very quiet. Like, I can't imagine this girl laughing like the girl did in the other video. Like, it's just like she's not that free of a spirit. And so that's my analysis of his interviews, and that's why I prefer, there was also another one which I'll screenshot here where the girl is wearing a cross, and Mormons don't really wear crosses. And in the cross video, they're in a coffee shop. And I'm like, so you're interviewing a girl wearing a cross in a coffee shop, and I'm supposed to believe this is a Mormon? Sorry guys. Here's a few more videos from the Black Menaces that I think do a much better job at accurately highlighting the climate of BYU.
So the question is, should queer students be allowed to date on campus?
Oh, that's a tough question. I've never really thought about it, so I don't know if I have an opinion right now. I feel like if you sign the honor code, you signed your own name to follow the standards of BYU. So I kind of feel like
you can watch the whole video if you want to. She just kind of keeps giving half answers. It's just interesting too to see her body language, because you can tell she's at odds with herself about the response. At least that's how I interpret it. I feel like she's like, I know that this is a bigoted, mean thing to say, but I don't feel like I can defend this very well, and yet I don't feel like I can also not defend it, because I feel like I need to stand up for my religion. I also feel like a lot in the interviews with the Black Menaces, they often say like, I don't know, I'd have to read more about that. And it's like a question that's like, do you think women deserve to vote? And they're like, I hadn't really thought about that. And it just feels like it is really sad to watch. And to me, what's echoed in these interviews is very similar to the essay I read earlier about, even though she was only a woman, she was still strong. And so let's watch a second video from them.
Okay, the question is, do you consider yourself a feminist, or would you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, dope, that's it. Cool.
Oh, hell yeah.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
No.
Okay, dope. Can I ask you why?
Maybe I just don't know a whole lot about it, and I feel like a lot of the views are a little bit more negative than I feel like they could be.
Okay, dope, that's it. Sweet.
Oh, the sing-songy voice. See, that girl, like, to me, I feel like that girl is kind of like how I used to be. Well, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but I don't think gay people should get married. And honestly, I think, too, watching this video, you can really see what I said about how they're almost like children. Very quiet, very sing-songy. They don't even really want to express an opinion with their chest. Like, no, I don't think so. And like I said, I see a lot of myself in these people that are being interviewed. I feel like when I think of someone like this girl, she, in every year and day and hour and minute of her life, it's been about religious indoctrination to be Mormon. And I saw a video recently, which is here, where this girl is just like, I hate Mormons. You can come at me, but I hate them. I hate Mormons. And that's not something I'll ever say, other than to repeat her words, obviously. But I feel like members of the Mormon Church, especially at this young, impressionable age, are heavily indoctrinated and brainwashed individuals who've never really been faced with an opposing point of view. Or when they have been faced with an opposing point of view, it's been so heavily demonized by their in-group that they really struggle to unpack it in a way that isn't just like dismissing the opposing viewpoint. And so I will never say I hate Mormons because I think Mormons are people in a cult who deserve compassion and love and support and help. And I don't think demonizing people like that it's not going to be a way to help them. I don't think that someone who makes a video that says I hate Mormons has the intent to help the people who are stuck in this religion to see some alternate side of reality. I don't defend their bigoted views. I don't defend their positions or stances about women or minorities or LGBTQ people. However, because I was once one of those people, I feel like the approach should not be to hate them, but to help them, because I am proof it's possible to help them. And so I just feel sad seeing stuff like I hate Mormons, because I think that it's not done with the intent to help anyone, but rather to just drive more hate and more derision between us versus them. I think too, when a lot of people hear the rules that exist at BYU, they're surprised that they can even get these young adults to follow them. And I've already been expressing how the years of indoctrination really go a long way. They also have the tattletaling option that I've talked about, and I'll share more details about in a bit. But I also was reflecting on this story that they told us. They first told us this story when I was doing my orientation. And then this is a story that's repeated often. If I remember correctly, it's also displayed in the testing center. So one of the founders of BYU was named Carl Mazer. And there's a statue of him on campus. And this is a quote from Mr. Mazer. He said, "Place me behind prison walls of stone ever so thick, reaching ever so far into the ground. There is a possibility that in some way or another I may be able to escape. But stand me on the floor and draw a chalk line around me and have me give my word of honor never to cross it. Can I get out of that circle? No, never. I'd die first." So I remember they told us this story our first week at BYU when explaining the honor code to us. So basically, this is just how dire they make it seem from day one at BYU. You are learning these rules, you're learning about modesty, you're learning about chastity, you're learning about not cheating on your tests, and all the other many rules that Mormons are already following outside of BYU. And they tell this story pretty consistently about how if you gave your word of honor, you should die first before breaking your word. And even as a BYU student, I was like, wow, I feel like he should just leave the circle. I feel like this is such a false narrative. Like he's set up this fantasy in his mind where somebody's like, stay in the circle, and he gives his word. Like, this is such a nonsensical story that truly would never exist. But he's just trying to express the level to which he's willing to follow and honor his word. But like I said, this was on display at the testing center, throughout BYU. It'd be handed out on flyers. And I feel like for people who are already prone to religious guilt, it is highly effective at mind control. Because for me, if I've given my word that I'd follow the honor code, and we even heard the same rationale from the girl who was talking about if gay people should be able to date openly. She's basically like, if they gave their word to follow the honor code, they have to follow it. No ifs, ands, or buts, and that's on them. And they do a really good job at placing the accountability back on you It's like, even though they get to make the rules and call the shots, they make you feel incredibly personally accountable, as if because you chose this that one time when you signed the honor code, you have to follow it for all 4+ years at the university. And if you have any regret, like of what I'm expressing, or if you have any second thoughts, or maybe you a change in your point of view, too bad, because you said it that one time, you should never ever change your mind, and you should die in the circle, basically. That reminds me of another interview I saw with the Black Menaces that I'll show you now.
Would you report someone to the honor code office for same-sex dating on campus?
Yes.
Okay, do you want to expand on that?
Sure. I mean, it's clearly outlined in the honor code, you know, and I took an oath to uphold that honor code and, you know, see or go after people that aren't seeing it, so.
What does the honor code say about same-sex dating?
I'll pause it there, and I'll link all of these below if you want to go peruse for yourself. But it's so, like, he's so immediate. Yes. I mean, a lot of the other ones, when they ask them, do you support same-sex marriage or things like that, they're kind of like, I don't think so. But he's so just... and then the rationale he gives is for being willing to rat out people is the honor code. And haven't mentioned this yet, when you sign the honor code, you agree not only to follow the honor code yourself, but to enforce other people to follow it too. And so that brings it even to another level where it's not even just you're viewing it as your religious responsibility to follow these rules, but it's also put in the honor code that it's your religious responsibility to police others as well. To read that portion of the honor code specifically, it says, encourage others in their commitment to comply with the honor code and dress and grooming standards. So, you know, if you're like this kid, who I'll also say I never ratted anyone out. So that, at least, even though I'm disappointed in Mormon me from time to time, I at least never did that. I was never that crazy, but it is part of the honor code that you're supposed to, at least it says, encourage others to comply. And then additionally, they provide a place for you to rat people out, which to me, I feel like it's one thing to say, like, okay, like, encourage others to comply, which is like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. But then to also give an apparatus that allows the students to tell on each other is next level. And I think that in his speech, which I find so sad and damaging and awful, not only does he hold these bigoted views towards LGBTQ people, but he also views it as his religious responsibility to tattle on them, to get them potentially in trouble, to report them to the university, to go after them, which is what he says in the video, because he views himself as being committed to do that as part of following the honor code. And who knows where that guy is now. I do, like I said, I do hold out hope for any person who's a member of this church to change their mind, just simply because I was once so devout. And I think we need to allow people to change their minds and to have the flexibility that comes from seeing the world in a different way. And I think it's okay to leave the door open for people to walk through rather than shutting them out or just saying, I hate Mormons or whatever, because you never know if just waiting in the back of their mind all of the times they thought maybe this isn't right, or maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing, and maybe finally they'll be ready to walk into the light as I see it. Another way in which the university enforces the religious rules and the campus policies is through something called an ecclesiastical endorsement. And this is something I had to do. And I feel like they have such an intense system of making sure that you are following the rules at every level. So your professors are checking in on you, the testing center, your roommates, you're supposed to go to church, you're supposed to pay tithing. And these are all just ways in which there's all these people around you to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing as part of following the honor code and being a member of the church. And the way an ecclesiastical endorsement works is that in order to maintain your position at the school, you have to have an active ecclesiastical endorsement. This is essentially a meeting if you're a member with a bishop. So for me, I met with my bishop. If you're attending the university as a non-member, you should still meet with whatever ecclesiastical leader has been cleared by your faith. So like a Jewish student at BYU would still be required to have an ecclesiastical endorsement given to him by his Jewish leader. And even an atheist, from what I can tell, would still need to find some sort of religious leader to at least clear him for an ecclesiastical endorsement in order to attend the university. So everybody has to have an ecclesiastical endorsement. And it happens once a year. And a major reason why it was so difficult for me in the last year of going to BYU is that my ecclesiastical endorsement was set to expire a month or so after I graduated. And so if there was anything that prohibited me from graduating when I planned to, so say maybe a credit didn't go through, or I didn't do well enough in a class, or some health issue, I would have to renew my ecclesiastical endorsement in order to get back into the school for the next semester. And I knew that if I was in an ecclesiastical interview to get my endorsement, I would have a really hard time being honest and not lying. I'd have to lie and be like, because they ask you things like, do you have faith in Jesus Christ? Do you believe in the Book of Mormon? Are you attending church regularly? Are you a full tithe payer? It's basically the temple recommend questions, very similar. And so I remember just feeling like if I don't graduate on time, I'm going to have to get my ecclesiastical endorsement renewed, and then I'm going to have to lie to a bishop. And we hadn't really been going to church, so then the bishop would know we weren't attending church, and then he'd be able to revoke my ecclesiastical endorsement, and then I couldn't graduate from BYU, because if you don't have an active ecclesiastical endorsement, you can't even graduate. So it just felt like the walls were closing in around me. Because as soon as I started questioning, I was like, it's not just my faith on the line. It's not just my family who might turn me away. It's not just the loss of my religious beliefs. It's actually additionally that I could lose my degree. Because there are people who've been kicked out of BYU because of their faith or because of breaking the honor code, their final semester of BYU, and they don't get a degree. All of it was for nothing. And there's even people who have tried to transfer to other colleges, and it's very difficult to get the college to accept most of your credits. You might be able to get it to accept your 101, your entry-level credits, but you may end up losing several years off of your academic progress. So this way in which BYU really holds you hostage it's so awful. And I see people from time to time going on the Mormon or ex-Mormon or BYU subreddits to say, like, what should I do? I'm halfway through my degree. I don't believe anymore. I don't want to do this, but I can't transfer out without losing my credits. Am I just trapped here for 2 years? And so this is also why whenever people graduate, I feel like there's this wave of every graduation season. There's a wave of people who announce things like, I'm gay, or I'm leaving the church, because as soon as they get that degree in hand and the university can't revoke it, then they can finally say, oh, I've been hiding this for the last few years. I also think what's so challenging about this dynamic is that often when you enter BYU, you're 18 years old, you're coming out of the wing of your family, you're coming out of being raised very devout and very religious, and then the period from being 18 to the end of your 4-year degree, so maybe 22 to 24 or older, depending on when you serve a mission, that's a very transformative time for a lot of people, and a time where they really start to think differently and think independently from what they were raised. And so what's challenging is that you might enter BYU at 18, fully willing to follow the honor code and fully willing to comply with all of the rules. And then by the time you're 20, 21, 22, you start to realize maybe you don't want to do this anymore. But because you've sunken so much time into your BYU degree, it just becomes increasingly difficult to leave the religion without also losing a lot of your academic progress. So it's really like like your hands are tied. And I think for a lot of people, they're just like that's what I did. I just have to suck it up. I just have to carry on my questioning in secret. And once I have my degree in hand, I can finally actually be honest with the world around me. And in the last year of attending BYU, I felt really anxious to really tell anyone how I was feeling, to be honest, I was just worried someone would tell on me, someone would find out and I would get kicked out and lose all my progress. And it was just like such a strange thing to have to live in such secrecy. And I remember going and sitting in the BYU library and like listening to the Mormon Stories podcast and listening to all of this other ex-Mormon content or critical Mormon content and feeling like I was just like some secret spy or something, because as soon as I started questioning and no longer believed, I just felt like I was an alien and I was no longer, the streets and the sidewalks I had once walked so easily as like an indoctrinated, faithful, believing member. I just felt like such an outsider, like overnight, and it was very strange. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you have a question about BYU, feel free to drop it in the comments. If you want to learn more about BYU, I do have this video, which I published about a year ago. Really, a lot of the stuff that I covered in that video is different than what I covered in this video, so you might find that one interesting if you just want to keep binge watching content about BYU. I also, as I said, have the Patreon video where I go over more of my assignments from my religious courses. So that's already posted if you want to go check that out. It's available now on my Patreon. I'll link that one below. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you all next week.